Are you curious why Robyn shows more passion over home equity than she ever did over saving the actual family? Robyn Brown has discovered a newfound passion for moral philosophy, specifically the kind that conveniently aligns with her bank account. With great conviction, she declares that Meri Brown is owed nothing beyond whatever fraction she and Cody deem appropriate. Naturally, this self-appointed guardian of ethics follows the proclamation with a heartfelt insistence that she has only ever been protecting Meri. It is an impressive display of altruism, if altruism were defined as guarding one's assets with talon-like precision. What emerges, however, is a portrait of someone whose fiercest emotions appear exclusively reserved for financial matters. The adoption storyline, once framed as an act of unity, now reads as a calculated maneuver to secure both control over her ex-husband and long-term financial insulation. Every directional point on this moral compass aims squarely toward preserving the Robyn and Cody economic unit. Her villain era, at long last, is fully realized. And with it comes a refreshing candor. Even the tears seem relieved to abandon their earlier pretense, sliding off her face just as cleanly as the makeup they're designed to move. In Robyn's personal accounting system, Cody is somehow entitled to the proceeds of Meri's home because he paid a random bill here and there. Yet Meri's funding of Robyn's down payment, explicitly acknowledged on camera as an investment for Meri, confers no reciprocal stake. The logic is dizzying. Both she and Cody have managed to talk in circles so vigorously that they've contradicted themselves, each other, and basic arithmetic. Once the haze clears, one thing becomes unmistakable. The so-called backdoor deal functions largely as a smokescreen. The real delay appears rooted in Meri refusing to sign away rights buried within documents Robyn conveniently presented as routine paperwork. This creative interpretation of financial responsibility is hardly shocking. Whether the disputed insurance was meant to be health or home insurance, the numbers she cites bear no resemblance to an actual mortgage payment. Then again, Robyn's idea of paying bills has historically consisted of placing them on the counter and letting the family pot worry about the rest. A grift disguised as household management. If she were truly committed to preventing anything morally wrong, one might wonder where this ethical fervor was during the sale of her own house, the property she repeatedly described as a shared family investment. By her own admission, it was never meant to be her house. Yet, the moment Meri's equity entered the equation, the collective memory grew selective, and the definitions of fairness grew wonderfully flexible. By any reasonable measure, Meri is owed at least half the proceeds of the home she financed. Should she choose to pursue this in court, their own recorded statements provide all the evidence necessary. Their pattern is blatant. Behave shadily behind the scenes, then emerge blinking into the daylight to deliver sanctimonious monologues about moral integrity. The contrast is almost theatrical. Robyn's worldview appears to boil down to a single guiding principle. Everything was a family asset until someone leaves the family, at which point, unfortunately, it sucks to be you. It's an interesting stance coming from the same collective that refused to lend Meri funds for the only profitable business venture the Browns have ever produced without demanding equity, all while happily accepting the Las Vegas home equity that Meri and Janelle funneled into Robyn's McMansion without offering them a cent of ownership in return. The financial doublespeak is relentless. Money contributed by Meri becomes a gift, but money funneled into Coyote Pass magically transforms into extra. The elasticity of these definitions could power a trampoline park. Still, there is one silver lining. Robyn is finally speaking. After seasons of evasive shrugs and theatrical eye-rolling, she is offering actual commentary, and in doing so, inadvertently illuminating precisely why the family model collapsed. Each participant appears genuinely convinced of their own narrative. No one is lying. They simply live in different realities. As Christine aptly noted, this divergence is the clearest possible window into the structural failure of their entire arrangement. Authenticity, it seems, has finally arrived, just not in the form its bearer intended. Here's what the show glosses over about Cody's work on his relationships and why it doesn't match reality. In a recent interview, Suki delivered what can only be described as the most candid autopsy yet of the Brown family's slow-motion implosion. Her observations, delivered with the patience of someone repeatedly forced to corral a man allergic to direct answers, offered a rare glimpse into the dynamics behind the camera. Dynamics that make the on-screen chaos look positively serene. To begin, she confirms the obvious. There is real emotion, real attachment, and yes, real anger between Cody and Janelle. The connection persists, and so does the communication, no matter how theatrically the relationship performs its death rattle for the cameras. But the interview's sharper edges cut elsewhere. Suki openly entertains the long-running suspicion that Robyn's influence has never been quite as passive as advertised. If viewers suspected behind-the-scenes manipulation, she at least acknowledges they may not have been imagining things. Her assessment of Cody's long-overdue apologies is equally unvarnished. They were for him, not for those he claims to be mending fences with, and they certainly do not rewrite his long-standing resume as a less-than-stellar father. And then there is the aesthetic ritual of Cody Brown, a man apparently held together by equal parts ego and specialty beverages. According to Suki, no cast member has ever required more primping, preening, mirror checking, hair fluffing, or producer-dispatched treasure hunts for hot tea and obscure water. It would almost be impressive if it weren't such a perfect metaphor for his entire approach to accountability. Her experience interviewing him seems equally illuminating. Guiding him back to the actual question is a full-time job. Extracting clarity requires the stamina of a marathoner and the charm of a hostage negotiator. On the more structural issues, namely the Coyote Pass mess, Suki leaves little doubt about where she believes the blame sits. Cody, she says plainly, manipulated the situation and bears responsibility. And with Robyn, she notes a new shift. The final wife standing is talking more freely now, perhaps because there is nothing left for her to lose. The coming revelation about the NDA, she insists, will further illuminate why the couple tried to lock the family narrative behind signatures and silence. Cody claims to be working on relationships with his children, though the children's own statements suggest a very different reality. Whether they appear on the show again is, according to him, up to the producers. Convenient, of course, to declare parental progress a scheduling matter. Suki credits the Brown children themselves for the grounded, resilient adults they have become, despite the environment around them, not because of it. She also notes that there are countless storylines that could be explored if the show truly wanted to focus on something other than the endless recycling of Cody's emotional evasions. Her curiosity extends to Robyn's professed religious convictions. If polygamy was once sacred enough to justify the family's entire identity, then honesty about what she believes now would be refreshing. Suki even predicts Robyn will push Cody toward taking another wife, not out of spiritual devotion, but because it may be the only viable way to keep the show breathing. It is difficult to imagine anyone volunteering for that particular assignment unless there were financial or practical incentives. And, as some observers have pointed out, the candidate would likely need to be compliant, older, and easily managed. The contrast between this interview and earlier, more restrained conversations is striking. Suki speaks with a clarity that suggests a desire to preserve her integrity, while making it clear she sees through the self-mythologizing. She even notes that she asked for a tour of the new house and received a conditional yes, an answer that, in true Brown family fashion, means absolutely nothing without a dozen caveats. Meanwhile, Christine and David enthusiastically invited her to Moab, a gesture notable mostly because it resembles normal human interaction, something in short supply elsewhere in the narrative. There remain unresolved contradictions the family has long avoided addressing. The notorious 50-50 divorce agreement required of Meri raises the lingering question of why no such equity-splitting concern ever seemed to apply to Cody or Robyn. particularly when Meri had been the one contributing substantial income and building equity. The adoption storyline likewise sits uncomfortably unexamined, a decision Meri made out of loyalty and sacrifice for Robyn, followed by years of indifference and ingratitude. If Robyn truly wishes to project piety and commitment to the principle, one might expect a level of integrity consistent with the faith she claims to hold. Instead, the interview paints a portrait of a woman far more committed to hierarchy, financial security, and the maintenance of her chosen status than to any shared spiritual calling. In the end, the interview offers something unusual in the Sister Wives ecosystem: honesty. Whether the show can survive honesty is another question entirely. But one thing is clear: if a new wife is ever ushered in to resuscitate the franchise, no one should pretend it was done for religious reasons. The only truly sacred element remaining appears to be the production budget. Are you wondering why Christine's reactions feel less like reality and more like a dress rehearsal? Christine Brown once embodied the refreshing counterbalance in a saga defined by delusion and denial. Lately, however, she appears to have mistaken herself for the production's emotional nucleus, swelling every slight into a three-act tragedy. The recent uproar over Cody's long-overdue apology, an apology everyone agreed he owed, has become the latest example of her flair for melodrama. The offense itself was legitimate. The performance wrapped around it was something else entirely. There is only so much wide-eyed indignation one can attribute to middle age before it begins to resemble middle school. But Christine hasn't changed so much as intensified. She has always been dramatic, the spiritual equivalent of an overzealous theater kid who never recovered from being cast as tree number 2. Add in the fact that this entire group was raised in a high-control, religious environment that left their emotional development somewhere between stunted and arrested, and the perpetual cringe practically explains itself. TLC knew exactly what it was purchasing: a spectacle of grown adults reenacting conflicts with the maturity of adolescence and the sincerity of paid performers. Still, the context matters. Christine may elevate everything to operatic scale, but her antagonists provide ample material. Cody Brown, for instance, remains a masterclass in condescension, an ego wrapped in curls and self-importance. His apology to Christine wasn't framed as remorse, but as a benevolent release, as if he were bestowing freedom upon an anguished soul still pining for him. The implication was unmistakable. She was obsessed, he was magnanimous, and David could enjoy the privilege of watching this grand act of emotional charity from his second-row seat. This was not an apology. It was a power play, a subtle jab at David, a self-mythologizing narrative for Cody, and a flimsy attempt to rewrite history to position himself as the one who let her go. Unfortunately for him, Christine had vacated that dynamic long before he attempted this theatrical gesture. The notion that she required his help to move on is delusional in a way that would be comedic if it weren't so predictably insulting. Yes, Christine is dramatic, almost professionally so. But in this instance, the outrage had substance. 2 decades under the weight of a man who weaponizes condescension is enough to justify more than a few sharp edges. If anything, the only misstep was staying in the room as long as she did. Meanwhile, the machinery behind the scenes continues to churn. Production demands repetition until ants become elephants, crafting mountains of conflict out of molehill moments. The family's once chaotic lives have settled into something dangerously close to normalcy. And when the drama doesn't exist, it must be manufactured. Christine, ever the enthusiastic participant, provides the necessary spark, sometimes too much of it. The result is a portrait of a woman simultaneously empowered and theatrically overwrought, paired with a man who still imagines himself the sun around which all discarded wives orbit. Embarrassing? Absolutely. Cringe? Perpetually. But in the grand ecosystem of televised dysfunction, It is precisely the combustible mix the network relies on, and the audience cannot look away from. Never underestimate how destructive one passive roommate can be. Janelle's carefully burnished reputation as the calm, reasonable matriarch collapses rather quickly when one revisits the early years of that household. The domestic realities alone paint a less than angelic portrait. This was a grown woman, unable or unwilling to meet the most basic expectations of communal living. Leaving a kitchen in disarray may be a forgivable personal habit in a private home, but in a shared environment, it becomes a burden that simply migrates to whoever needs the space next. The unspoken question lingers. How many times did Meri have to clean up after her? And at what point did the favor silently calcify into an expectation? Then there was the casual entitlement regarding shared living space, as though someone else's room were a hallway perfectly available for foot traffic. Add to that the repeated insistence that Meri should accept less on the grounds that she had only one child, as if family size were an automatic moral claim on resources. And the domestic imbalance becomes glaring. Layer those household grievances atop the interpersonal dynamics, and the situation transforms from mildly inconsiderate to spectacularly untenable. Imagine taking in a new roommate who is chronically passive, mess-prone, conflict-avoidant, formerly related by marriage, newly involved with one's husband, and somehow still offended by the sight of marital hand-holding in one's own home. The demand to accept all of this as a spiritual duty would strain the patience of a saint. Meanwhile, the soundtrack of the household reportedly included the couple's intimate moments filtering through thin walls, an indignity that requires no embellishment. The broader moral calculus of shared living remains simple. Leaving communal areas in disarray is effectively theft of time, of labor, of mental space. Some people manage to grasp this instinctively. A temporary house guest, even while juggling childcare and logistics, may still clean dishes, tidy toys, and communicate clearly out of sheer respect for others. Basic courtesy, it seems, is not universally distributed. Beyond the domestic sphere, Janelle's interpersonal history hardly strengthens her halo. Once the sister-in-law, she divorced Meri's brother with a shrug and soon embarked on secret lunches with the very man who would become her next husband, scheduling the wedding on Meri's birthday for good measure. Add to that the rapid succession of pregnancies and an ever-growing household, while Meri struggled to have a child of her own, and the imbalance becomes even starker. Yet somehow, criticism rarely lands on Janelle. Grace flows toward her as if by reflex, and then comes the myth of her industriousness. The record shows a woman comfortable enough to slip out to movies, while Christine managed a small army of children, somewhere between 12 and 15, while pregnant and working additional jobs into the evening. Lazy may be too generous a descriptor for that arrangement. In light of all this, the persistent narrative of Janelle as the reasonable, blameless pillar of the family reads less like a fair assessment and more like an oddly durable public relations win. The facts suggest something far less flattering and far more human. Here's what they don't tell you about those innocent questions Robyn kept asking. The great mystery of who breached Meri's confidences was presented with admirable theatrics, as though the roster of suspects extended beyond a single, glaringly obvious candidate. Christine? Hardly. Proximity does not equal intimacy. Janelle? Their shared therapy sessions were a testament to strained coexistence, not emotional disclosure. Once the dust settles, only one name ever remains on the whiteboard. Christine's own memoir provides a helpful mirror image. Every private remark shared with Cody somehow materialized in Robyn's conversations. Even something as mundane and deeply one-sided as the infamous back rubs became communal property the moment Christine refused to continue. The only two people present for those private moments were Christine and Cody, Yet Robyn felt perfectly entitled to inquire about their sudden disappearance. Apparently, confidentiality is optional when the self-appointed family fixer decides information must flow through her. It is a familiar psychological pattern. The individual who must help, must mediate, must know everything, inevitably becomes the household courier of sensitive information. The impulse to supervise, repair, and reign over every emotional crevice conveniently provides a steady supply of leverage. In this case, the solution Robyn gently proposed, encouraging Christine to resume her massage duties, also spared Robyn from performing them herself. Generosity, it seems, is most noble when delegated. Meanwhile, Cody's self-interest requires no forensic examination. It is the only consistent principle governing his behavior. From the moment Robyn entered the family, the privacy of his existing relationships evaporated. Communication flowed freely, but only between the king and his chosen queen, while the rest of the family watched their boundaries dissolve in real time. The result was not a leak, but a deluge. Once Robyn assumed her role, every private conversation became communal property for exactly 2 people. And the rest of the family learned quickly that there would be no confidentiality in a household run by a duo so committed to information sharing that even intimacy became a team sport. Never mistake a tearful performance for moral integrity. The Brown family has already learned that the hard way. Robyn Brown has spent years cultivating a public persona built on fragile innocence and perpetual victimhood. The performance might play well in an insulated living room, but it collapses rather quickly when placed before an audience not beholden to maintaining household harmony or pandering to Cody Brown's mercurial affections. The world is not obligated to applaud selective helplessness. Her self-description is particularly revealing. People who are genuinely shy or unfailingly moral rarely need to advertise it. Those qualities typically announce themselves without a marketing campaign. Repeated declarations of virtue tend to function less as truth and more as preemptive defense. Nowhere is the discrepancy between Robyn's stated values and observable actions more glaring than in the silent treatment surrounding Cody's absence during his daughter's major surgery. The moment demanded parental presence, accountability, and the bare minimum of paternal instinct. Instead, there was nothing. Not from him, and pointedly, not from her. Someone so devoted to moral high ground might have considered using it to insist he show up for his own child. The fact that this never happened says more than any confessional segment ever could. The contrast with the other wives is stark. For all their conflicts, the original 3 demonstrated a basic, unwavering willingness to support one another through crises. Robyn's refusal to acknowledge or challenge Cody's chronic failures as a father to his older children reveals a calculation. As long as he treats her favorably, the rest can burn. It is an outlook as self-serving as it is ethically hollow. Cody, of course, appears dimly aware that the woman beside him is not the virtuous figure she so meticulously promotes. Their partnership now exists in a haze of mutual delusion, propped up by denial and an ever-expanding ledger of family harm. Living as the architect of so much emotional wreckage cannot be restful work, but it becomes easier with a partner willing to validate every misstep. And then there is the pattern too often glossed over, Robyn's scorched earth approach to parental alienation. From the beginning, she pursued it with striking persistence, encouraging and amplifying Cody's disdain toward his sons, frequently on camera and without hesitation. The damage was not incidental. It was cultivated. Life eventually tallies the debts people create. Harm does not disappear simply because someone insists on their own purity. In the end, the story unfolding in the Brown family is not one of misunderstood martyrdom, but of intentional choices and the consequences that inevitably follow. Never assume a paperwork divorce is harmless, especially when it resurfaces years later to rewrite financial history. The supposed formality of Cody and Meri's divorce has aged into quite the plot twist. now retrofitted with legal terminology, as if the separation were a meticulous, jointly planned exit strategy rather than a symbolic maneuver. One moment, it's a mere paperwork shuffle. The next, it's the foundational justification for dividing assets, as though an entire marriage had quietly ended years earlier. The timeline, in its current retelling, suggests a covert breakup disguised as a failing reconciliation, all while the audience was assured they were still working on things. Meanwhile, Meri's official departure and subsequent spiritual release arrived only recently, long after the narrative insisted the two were still entangled. At that point, the shared property roster was limited to Coyote Pass, and any funds she had funneled into the household, or to Cody and Robyn directly, were informal personal loans. Yet somehow an ancient divorce, dusted off from storage, is now the convenient legal anchor for recalculating who owes what to whom. The arithmetic is particularly creative. Meri is expected to hand over half of her assets, but the concept mysteriously reverses when it comes to anything in which he had a stake. Family finances included. No symmetry, no reciprocity. Just a sudden enthusiasm for fairness that flows in only one direction. A competent interviewer might have pressed harder here, because the contradictions are impressive even by the family's standards. When the Las Vegas homes were purchased, the marriage was legally intact, and community property laws rendered the two equal owners by default. But by the time Coyote Pass entered the picture, the legal divorce had been finalized, and trust in Meri had apparently evaporated so thoroughly that she was barred from sole ownership of anything. Instead, she was required to co-own with Janelle, while Cody attached his name freely elsewhere. It is quite the acrobatic feat. A divorce treated as meaningless when emotional legitimacy is needed, and suddenly sacred when asset distribution becomes inconvenient. The only consistent principle appears to be that every rule is negotiable, except the ones that keep Meri at a disadvantage. Here's the problem with Robyn's heroic act. The only thing she ever saved was her own storyline. Robyn Brown has sounded the alarm on a supposed code red, yet the only emergency appears to be the collapse of her own story under the weight of basic facts. The situation plays out like the courtroom scene in A Few Good Men. If everyone supposedly acted to keep Meri safe, why, exactly, was Meri ever in danger? The narrative goes like this. Robyn insists she delayed the property deal to shield Meri from some ominous backdoor agreement. Stirring stuff. Until the paperwork is examined. The deeds reallocating the property so Meri would receive an equitable 25% were already drawn up and signed by Cody, Janelle, and Meri in January 2025. Only one signature remained outstanding, Robyn's. Those documents sat fully prepared, awaiting no heroic intervention, just her pen. So what protection was allegedly being offered? Protection from a situation that had already been resolved on paper? An imaginative claim, certainly, but not a plausible one. What does hold together is the combined account from Cody and Janelle. Janelle, concerned about jeopardizing the overall deal, explored options with Cody. Their intention, as stated, was to ensure Meri's share remained intact, not to shortchange her. Meanwhile, Cody and Robyn appear to have treated Robyn's unsigned deed as a convenient bit of leverage, what Cody himself cheerfully labeled a bargaining chip. The strategy might have been subtle if public records did not exist. Unfortunately for Robyn, they do. Those records show the deeds were signed and acknowledged by everyone except Robyn on staggered dates in January 2025. Her signature did not materialize until March 26th, and the parcels closed in early April. The chronology speaks plainly. The delay was hers alone, and it served no purpose other than withholding completion of an already agreed distribution. Thus, the code red lands squarely on Robyn's explanation, not on any alleged threat to Meri's interest. The story contradicts both the documents and, at times, itself, often within a single breath. Splitting the cast this season may have been an inspired production move. It made the inconsistencies impossible to disguise. Every new contradiction adds to the now familiar pattern, a narrative that shifts whenever cornered by facts. And amid all this, one theme remains constant. Robyn contributes nothing stabilizing to the family dynamic. Her presence functions far more as a subtraction than an addition.